Well, hello and welcome to the early birds here to our live stream. We've got a couple minutes before we start it proper, but I did want to go ahead and kind of say hi to everyone, making a couple minor graphics changes here real quick. We do have Mike in the background. He can hear us. We'll intro him in a second. But I just want to make sure, too, that everything is working as it needs to on the stream. I'm going to just do our quick check here as we always do. A little bit rainy here today, but other than that, we are having a pretty decent day. Got a nice box from our good friend Ryan at CastlemaniaGames.com that we've got some projects coming. All right, audio is working there. That's what we like to hear. I see Keith is here, Dion's here, Arcade Mad was here, Nacho Man 64 was here, and we are almost to the top of the hour here now. In the just right around here, you guys see. Have a question, use at Rock Solid Productions in the chat to highlight it. That makes sure that I can see it a little bit easier to be able to ask questions of Mike. We'll probably leave the Q&A for the audience till the very end. We've got a pretty extensive list of stuff we're going to ask him already, so hopefully that will answer a lot of questions. Retro Gaming with Edgar is here. Thank you much. So before we get started, I did want to let you all know that this episode of Rock Solid Productions is being brought to you by CastlemaniaGames.com, your home for accessories, consoles, and games for the modern and retro video game enthusiast. CastlemaniaGames.com carries the top names in the business, from HD Retrovision, RetroTink, Retrobit, Retrofighters, Hyperkin, and more. Plus, when you shop at CastlemaniaGames.com, you earn Castle Cash, their rewards program that allows you to earn money towards future purchases. And don't forget, if you use promo code ROCKSOLID10, you can save 10% off of most items on the website. And rest assured, they are open and shipping daily as normal to serve you and your family during the current situation that's going on. So we are going to go ahead and bring in Mike from RetroTink. Mike, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Gary? Thanks for having me on.
First of all, I just got to say thank you for spending some time with us. One thing I do want to not forget later on, you need to let me know what the scoop with the bunnies are on the website. I just got to know
Yeah,
that
of
later on.
course.
But seriously, thank you so much. I hope with everything going on, you and your family, you're doing okay with everything considering.
Yeah, we're doing okay. It's not like we were going outside that much anyways. We're both lucky in the sense that not only do we live kind of lives of hermits, but most of our work can be done remotely. So, life continues. How about you? Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, overall, I'm kind of in the same way. Being a gamer, we've kind of been used to self isolation, and a lot of times it hasn't been our choice. So this time it is. But I am excited to have you on today. I have been a big fan of you and the RetroTink 2X for a long time. And for those who aren't familiar, and before we get proper into this, again, we need to know what this situation with the bunnies are. But I do see that you recently finished a project that I am super proud to see someone else do, and you Voltard your Super NES Junior. But I gotta ask you, man, where's the hot glue?
Where is the hot glue? That is a good question. I'll take a step back and I'll just have to admit that a lot of our products, not the gaming stuff, but my company, some of our early products actually did ship with hot glue. And I'm not proud of it, but we've actually put out production devices with hot glue. And after a few runs, at least me personally, I've decided never ever to use that again.
Well, and that's the great thing about this hobby is what you learn going forward. I mean, I look at what I learned from the first mod I did, which was one of Voltar's RGB mods on an N64, and I've done a few of them now. And each time I do it, I learn something so that the next one I do is better than the last one, and so on and so forth. I also see you've been kind of diving into some Star Trek on your Twitter feed as well, seeing a lot of Next Generation, but you have to admit, Deep Space Nine, best captain there ever was.
I completely agree. So first of all, I probably like you, a lifelong hardcore Star Trekkie, but I actually do completely agree. Deep Space Nine had the depth that none of the other series had. It is my personal favorite as well.
So let's kind of dive into it there. And I see the man, the myth, the legend himself, Castlemania Ryan, is in the house. Says, "Nice shirt, Mike."
Yup.
Laser
This is
Beam
great.
Industries. That's pretty
Those are,
awesome.
yeah, he's got the.
So for those who may not be as familiar with, Mike Chi, the person, versus RetroTink, give people a little bit of background. How did you get involved in gaming, and why did you decide to make this a passion project of yours?
That's a good question. So, like all of us, we probably played games when we were young, right? But I think if I may be so bold, my story was a little bit different. So I came to the US when I was 5 years old. And although in a lot of ways today, China technologically is ahead of us, at least in consumer and just day-to-day lives, back in the late 80s, early 90s, we had nothing. I don't even think we had a landline. So imagine this country bumpkin coming to the US, and I sit down and there's an NES, right? And you push buttons and things actually happen. And from that day on, my mind was blown and I was hooked. You grow up, get a job, go to school and whatnot. But like many of us, you get to a certain age that you start looking back to your childhood with certain fondness. And I was like, I have a little bit more spare time now. What can I do to start playing games? And that's how I got in this rabbit hole. Sorry, pardon the pun. I started trying to figure out how to connect my consoles, get the best emulation set up. And that's when I started building devices that I thought I personally needed, and it turned out that luckily it's useful for other people as well.
Very true. And I mean, one of the things that I love about the way that the RetroTink, the original, came out, is the fact that it definitely had that feeling of a passion project. And it addresses the problems that we have with a lot of retro gaming, where pretty much anything prior to the PS3, the Xbox 360, the Wii U, none of them had digital outputs, and the average consumer doesn't want to play on CRTs. Purist, I will grant you, you love your CRTs, have fun with it. It's not what I want to play on. I know there's a lot of other people out there that they don't want to have a specific TV just for gaming, when they have, like, I've got this beautiful Samsung 65-inch sitting behind me I love playing on. There have been other solutions out there. We all know the crappy little AV to HDMI boxes. And there's really high-end solutions out there like the Framemeister and the OSSC. I actually own an OSSC. When you decided to develop something, what were your goals compared to what was already out there? Between, you had the low end with those AV to HDMI boxes, and then you had the high end as well.
My goal was really, and this I came up with the idea while driving to work, actually, just randomly, was was it possible to build a little box that worked with generally the cables that you already had and could still process the image and signal in a way that didn't mess up your gaming experience. Might not be the best quality, but it provides an authentic gaming experience to what you remember with your retro consoles and whatnot. And I saw that device didn't really exist, so I started doing some research, and that's how the 2X came to be.
So where did the name itself come from? I mean, when I thought of RetroTink, I'm like, okay, you're tinkering around with stuff. Where did the name come from?
That is exactly right. So there's two sides to that. So first of all, Tink is named after Tinky the rabbit, which he's now my 8-year-old Holland Lop rabbit, and we love him. So named it after Tinky, RetroTink, and of course, as you said, Tink also has the connotation of just tinkering, building stuff. So it worked out on both sides.
Now, when the original RetroTink 2X came out, I have, like I say, I have one. I fell in love with it. I love the simplicity of it, where I can sometimes have, and this may just be due to the setup that I use as someone who is capturing footage and who is streaming, where with my OSSC, specifically with Nintendo consoles, I get frame drops, audio loss, all sorts of things. It's not a plug and play solution. It looks gorgeous when it's working, but it can take a long way to get there. Did you follow more of like a KISS type principle with the RetroTink compared to the Framemeister or the OSSC?
Yeah. I'll first of all I'll answer your concern about the OSSC. I think The blame is as much, if not more, on just the horrible sync output of the Nintendo consoles. They're off spec, so when you know upscale it without any lag, that a lot of those idiosyncrasies get passed on to your display, and that's what the problem that's what causes the problem, more so than any issue with the OSSC itself. And I think that for the most part has been addressed in the latest revisions. So I would encourage you to try the latest firmware and give it a shot again. But to answer your second point, yes, I'm a big fan of simple. I'm lazy, and maybe this is self-serving to say, but I always say a lazy engineer is a good engineer, because you build things that are just very simple and intuitive to use. And in the end, I think that's always a good thing. I always remember back in school, a lesson that one of our professors taught us. There's just no substitute for clear thinking. Clear thinking to a simple design, 9 times out of 10, is better than an overly complex design with a lot of failure points. And that's kind of been my guiding principle in everything I do.
Well, and I will try, and I try to keep my firmware up to date on the OSSC. It's just been one of those, like, it works flawlessly for my Sega stuff, so I don't screw around with it a whole lot, and I use my OSSC for that. But my RetroTink, that is my go-to device for my Nintendo systems. I've got my RGB modded Super NES Junior going through that. My RGB modded N64 goes through it. And the beautiful thing about the RetroTink is the fact that it's not only component input for like use with HD Retrovision cables, but it has that composite NS video. And where I find it that I really appreciate it and it makes me play the system more is I actually have a Sharp Famicom Twin Turbo. And I don't have to worry about going through the AV jacks into my television. I can capture it, and with the simplicity of that device itself, I can play both my Famicom games and the Famicom disk system, and it looks great.
Yeah, I'm glad. Well, first of all, thank you. I'm really glad you like it. And that to me was having that S video jack was one of the things that made me really happy about the original and the current 2X designs, because that gets you, I'd say, maybe 89% of the quality of RGB or component video, but those cables are inexpensive and easy to find, and you might already have them. So that's kind of a drop-in solution, especially since S video, has kind of died. Otherwise, you can't really find a box that processes S video. And it's nice that the devices do have component inputs for when you want to get an HD Retrovision cable for the best quality. And if you have an unmodded console that only does composite, well, that's okay. You've got that covered too. The image quality may not be the greatest, but it still provides, at least to me, a perfectly great gaming experience.
Now, one of the major differences I see with the RetroTink 2X is right in its name, 2X. It is so before I even finish that question, I have to ask you because I get beat up on this all the time. Is it accurate to say that this is an upscaler, or is it a line doubler, or can you use the terms interchangeably? Because I've gotten beat up in the comment section because I call it an upscaler. If it's increasing the resolution from 240 to 480, technically, isn't that what it's doing, is upscaling?
So that is a good question. And first, maybe a little bit blunt when I say this. People get worked up too much over semantics. Like, does it really matter? Just play the game. Sorry. But I think, at least to my understanding, it is an upscaler because, as you say, it's taking the low resolution signal and increase resolution, upscaling. Now, it uses the simplest form of upscaling, which is line doubling, right? There's more advanced forms of upscaling, such as what the OSSC or the Framemeister does, but they're not exclusive terms. Line doubling is a subset of upscaling, so it is accurate to say it's an upscaler that uses doubling.
And you're right, and I don't get hung up on it. I just know that there are people that, when you get too hung up in technobabble, yeah, no, I mean, when you get hung up in technobabble, you kind of overlook just, it doesn't matter if it's maroon or red, they're both kind of shades of the same thing. Not a great example, but you know what I mean there. But talking about the 2 times line doubler to go from 240p to 480p, did you ever consider going with something, again, to maybe compete more directly with the OSSC and the Framemeister to do a 3x, 4x, 5x type line multiplication?
That's a good question and a question I get all the time. And there's two parts of the answer. First of all, it's not, I guess, at least in my mind, the creation of these devices wasn't really to compete with the OSSC and Framemeister. You know, it's sometimes, you know, people get in the mentality of it's one or the other, and it has to be right one or the other, but it's not. I think they're actually very complementary devices with different capabilities and different price points. Just the fact that the video inputs are very different, I think, speaks to that. But the other, the technical side of that answer is Line 2X has a very nice property because if you look at standard definition video and the timing properties of standard definition video, if you multiply that by a factor of 2 exactly, you're pretty much at 480p, which is the lowest resolution that modern TVs can support reliably. So Line 2X works great because you end up with a signal that's either exactly or very close to what your modern TV can accept. So that generally works with pretty much everything. Now, if you want to do line 3x, 4x, 5x, those timings are very different. So there's two approaches. Either you can do the OSSC approach, which is line, tripling or quintuple, taking those timings and multiplying them by a factor of 3, 4, 5. You do get an output, but that output isn't exactly standard, so you have compatibility issues. And I didn't want to go that route because, I like plug and play simplicity. And also, quite frankly, Marx is quite smarter than me. So whatever he does in 3, 4, 5x is going to be way better than what I could do. So I didn't want to go down that route. It doesn't make sense to reinvent the OSSC. The Framemeister approach is interesting, but that's also very, very complicated. I'm sure the Framemeister guys are smarter than me, and you end up with a device that's $400. So it wasn't really what I was looking at doing.
Well, and quite honestly, I didn't talk to these guys ahead of time about this. I don't even know that they know who I am, but I cannot recommend the guys from My Life in Gaming highly enough. If you want to learn more about, RGB, SCAR, and different timings and everything, their RGB master classes are exceptional. And what I love about it is you get both the deep dive, here's all the technobabble that you can possibly swallow, and at the same time they also dumb it down for the layperson to understand, where they have got such a great chemistry, first of all, between the two of them, and the way that they deliver their information is great. So definitely check out the My Life in Gaming guys and their whole RGB masterclass that they have done. And they've done a lot of stuff on the RetroTink, on the Framemeister, and on the OSSC too, to kind of compare all of them as well.
Now, I couldn't agree more. And I'm really grateful that they took the time to look at my stuff, and they're such an invaluable resource. Between My Life in Gaming and Retro RGB, that's pretty much how I got started in 2017, because I came back into this field knowing zip, and I kind of self-taught myself all these things by watching all of My Life in Gaming's videos and reading Retro RGB's website.
Yep, and between that and one other one, for me, for doing import stuff, the guys over at Famicom Dojo were A, funny, and B, really knowledgeable about that stuff. I do want to address one question that just came in through the chat real quick before we get on to our next question. Enthusiast Game Room, I don't know if he's still in here. Castlemania Ryan might be able to answer this for you, but he wants to know if the RetroTink products are sold directly in Latin America. I believe that Ryan will ship to Latin America. Mike, I know you do direct fulfillment I think you do direct. You do, because you've got a store on the website as well. Do you ship internationally?
Yeah, we ship internationally. I think Orion does, and I think all the resellers of our products can ship internationally. We don't have a Latin American reseller. It does take a little while, unfortunately, to get over there. I think, at least in my personal experience, probably 3-4 weeks, unless you want to splurge and pay for DHL or FedEx, but that honestly costs almost as much as the device itself.
Yeah, it's not cost effective at that point. And hi to John Riggs, another great creator in here. If you guys have not seen John's stuff, make sure you check him out and throw him a subscribe as well. Now, on my review of the original RetroTink, I did have a couple comments pop up, and I I think you can kind of answer both of these in one because they're very similar, I want to say. A person by the name of Julen stated that the current version of RetroTink, and this is back again, the original when it launched, is incomplete. The designer forgot some resistors, and it makes some games flash and unplayable. And what's on my shelf, I'm sorry, stated the RetroTink has displays incorrect colors when used with a 32X and a Genesis Model 2. The problem is intermittent and semi-predictable. Those games which have a bright flash seem to send colors out of whack, such as entering or leaving special stage in Sonic 2. Some games you have problems from the jump right as you power on the system. I kind of want to give you a chance to address those and see, is it a one-off issue, or are these guys, are they making it up? Is it something that needs to be addressed?
Yeah, they're actually two separate technical issues, and I'll address both of them. So the first one regarding the loss of sync on flashlight, that is completely correct. Although I think the comment itself was probably out of date in the sense that that was fixed in early 2019. So the original RetroTink 2X released in 2018, I'm ashamed to say, did omit an attenuation resistor on the video line. So I violated my rule number 2 of engineering. Rule number 1 was keep it simple. Rule number 2 is always follow the freaking data sheet, which I'm ashamed to say I didn't do in that case. So if you have a really bright flash of light on certain consoles with a hotter than normal video output, that does cause a loss of sync. The problem is relatively rare, though. I think I've gotten less than 10 direct mentions of the problem to me, and in those cases I took the boards back and it was a simple mod to fix them. So yeah, that was my bad, and not proud of it, but at least that's been fixed in pretty much the majority of RetroTinks ever made and shipped. The second issue regarding the incorrect colors on the Sega Genesis, and especially Sega 32X, I blame Sega 100%. So your old that is a problem with a very horrible off-spec encoder in the Sega that Sega used. Your CRT TV is pretty lenient because it's taking off the air signals, which are noisy, so it has to be designed to be lenient. Now, a lot of the newer modern digital video decoder chips, they're not so forgiving. And because the color carrier signal on these Sega consoles is so off-spec, the video decoder can't lock on it correctly and generate the correct colors. And that's actually a problem that also happens with the Framemeister. And I think My Life in Gaming actually talked about that in their last video, or they talked to me about it. I don't remember, but it is a problem with modern video decoder chips that a lot of them don't lock on correctly to the Sega consoles. The solution, of course, is to buy an HD Retrovision cable, which you probably should, just for the quality jump between the composite output of the Sega, which is really, really bad even on a good day.
Well, and I appreciate the honesty and the transparency, and I'm sure those two folks who had left those comments, they probably never imagined that they would get an answer directly from you. So thank you for addressing that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no
problem. But that's the past. Let's talk about the future, and that is not only the RetroTink 2X Pro, your newest, basically the follow-up to the original RetroTink 2X, but you've been super busy with other products. Can you kind of give us an overview of, there's the 2X Pro, there's the Classic, the 2X RGB, the RGB to SCART. What have you not been working on?
What have I not been working on? Fortunately, lately I've had a lot of time because I've been staying at home, but the other products that we're working on, the first two I'll talk about are the transcoders. So the RGB to comp and comp to RGB. So those are high quality transcoders that take RGB SCART to component video or vice versa. They're pretty simple products. It's all analog. There's no adjustments, no firmware, but it does what it's supposed to do, and it does it very simply. So if you have a setup, for example, we have one of these, right? And you want to get the output to your component video CRT TV. Well, you could put a RGB to comp on top of that. Or if you have one of these guys,
that's sexy right there, I've got to say.
It is awesome. I just got this in today. I am stoked. You have one of these, right? And your setup is 90% component, but you have one RGB console where you can use a comp to RGB to plug it into the setup. It's not a super popular device, but I think it fills a need if you need it, and it does it well.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, please.
I was just going to say, going from one product to, design, test, build, test some more, refine, and ship to multiple. I mean, how did that affect you from both a business standpoint, a workload standpoint, a QA standpoint, a sanity standpoint?
Well, I guess I'm lucky in in two ways. First of all, I don't see this as work. This is kind of what I do when I get home to, to not think about actually going to work. So I'm happy to come home and do this. It's actually quite relaxing for me. So yeah, I'm super happy that I get the opportunity to work on this instead of cooking or cleaning and that kind of thing, right? The second thing is, from a workload perspective, I'm very lucky in the sense that my wife's my business partner, so she handles all the business operations. When you get a RetroTink package that's nicely packaged, that's her work, right? She manages all the orders and the workflow, and that's how I have time to actually design the product and do technical support. So it's really a mom and pa team that we do in our nights and evenings. So that's, I guess I'm lucky in that sense. That's how I'm able to find time to do all this.
Well, and that's also, and the quality can just be seen in everything throughout. And let's talk a little bit about the 2X Pro. Like I mentioned, I don't have one yet. I'm waiting for them to come back in stock. I know that you've been, the great thing with everything going on, you've been very frequent with like updates and, waiting on parts from suppliers, so on and so forth. Expect to have them by this date, ship by this date, so that way you can go ahead and pre-order them and know about when you'll get them fulfilled. And I'm obviously going to go ahead and order it through Ryan over at Castlemania Games. But can you kind of give us a rundown on the overall features for those who may not have been following very closely, and this may be the first time that they're hearing that there is a 2X Pro out there?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. The 2X Pro is basically the next evolution of the original RetroTink 2X, which we all now call the Classic to differentiate the two. The 2X Classic, it was I think it was a great design. I love it, obviously, but it started out as a hobbyist design. That's why it came with a plexiglass enclosure, right? And to be honest, it evolved from basically something that I built for myself in my spare time, thinking that only I would use it. And I am so happy and grateful that so many other people love it and enjoy it. And I took all the feedback I got, and at the same time, I was like, hey, this thing is actually becoming a thing. Maybe I should start taking it seriously. So the Pro name is as much for myself to, hey, this is a professional product, right? Not a hobbyist device, as well as to just say it's got new features. So the Pro really tried to address as much as possible the requests/complaints from the original Classic. We got a professional injection molded enclosure, which I think looks really nice. So now it looks like a consumer product that you buy. The other big thing it has is it has USB firmware upgrade capability. So as I come out with new features, you don't need to get a tool. You can just download the PC-based program and flash the firmware through the USB port. To me, those are the two biggest things. Another big request we got was scanline generation. So the Pro does have the ability to take 480p and blank every other line. Doesn't look that great on a 1080p display, but if you have a bright OLED 4K or a nice LCD 4K, it does look pretty good. The other thing the Pro has is, I really try to think, if I'm designing a professional product, one step above what most consumer products would do, right? Maybe closer to a medical device or a high-end research device. We use really high-quality PCB manufacturing and really high-quality parts, power supplies, and everything. So it really was taking the guts of the 2X and trying to push it, to the next level as a professional product.
Now, and I do want to provide some clarity here too. The Pro coming out doesn't mean the original is going away, and you kind of hinted at this earlier that you continued on with the original and you're now calling it the RetroTink Classic.
Yep, it's called the RetroTink Classic, and it's the Pro has a lot of great features, but the RetroTink Classic is still a great product. Especially if you don't care about the features that the Pro adds, they have the same properties, zero lag, and handles component S-video and composite really well.
Well, and I'm one of those along with not liking CRTs, I hate scanlines. So for me, that's one of the things that's like, yeah, I'm going to catch some heat on that one from some people in the community. Now, and you hinted on this next point a little bit as well, is the fact that one of the things I really do like about the Pro is the fact that it does now have that included case. And being a Star Trek fan, I hope you appreciate this term, but the original felt a little kit bashed, or it almost reminded me of like those Arduino projects or Raspberry Pi. Were you thinking the community back with the original one would come out with cases of their own, or were you kind of like, you know what, I don't think this is going to be this big of a deal. What it is what it is, and we're going to go from there? Because for those who aren't aware, the OSSC, when it first came out, was pretty much released as a kit that you had to put together, and it was very similar layout and looks and everything to the original RetroTink.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was, to be honest, completely honest, I kind of took inspiration from how the OSSC did it with a glass enclosure. I'll start by saying I'm an electrical engineer, an old school one, so I can't think in 3D space. The minute I pick up a CAD program, I kind of get a headache, and it just doesn't work in my head. So that was really the best I could do. I was like, yeah, it's a hobbyist effort. It's just, as you say, let's just kit bash this thing. And see where it goes. And, along the way, we were really lucky to have this guy, Greg Collins Laser Bear, come out with a very, very professional 3D printed enclosure. Let me grab one.
Well, while he's grabbing that, I actually have one. If you guys are interested, if you have an original before it was classic and you want to make that mod, it's like a 10-minute installation. It's super easy to do, and it makes it a whole lot easier to get at the different function buttons. And there we go.
Yeah, to me, this case is just as good as the one that the Pro uses, right down to the actuated buttons. So to answer your question, starting from the beginning, it started as a kit bash, but I was really lucky that there are some very talented 3D designers out there.
Yeah, I mean, and that case is awesome. Like I say, I have one. I absolutely love it. Now, while you've got that one there, let's kind of talk about the output or the inputs and the outputs. Let's kind of talk about, first of all, one of the major changes to the Pro over the original, and that is the output connector. It's now a proper HD cable port, essentially. You don't need adapters. It's not a mini connector. It's a standard HD TV port.
Yep, that's right. So this one uses a mini, and the other one has a full-size port. Fortunately, I don't have that. That was one of the biggest complaints, and I'm glad to say that it's been addressed, because I didn't think about it at first because it was a hobbyist. Like I said, I just thought only I was going to use it, so I had one cable and it worked fine. But let me tell you, it drove me crazy too.
Now, let's talk about the inputs, because there has been some changes here on the Pro versus the original. And you have component, composite, and S-video. They're all still supported. But now the composite and one of the component cables, the inputs are combined into one. What was the purpose for this change?
Yeah, so here's the classic, and there's the green jack and the yellow jack for one of the component and composite inputs. Now internally, they're actually shorted together, so they were redundant. It didn't make sense to have two when you just have a nice clean layout. And in the RetroTink products, you can't have more than one video source anyways, so you can just double up and share the green and yellow jacks.
Well, and I will say, for those who may have tried this in the past, and I'm guilty of this, so I tried going into the audio with a Y splitter, having component and composite all going in there, figuring, oh, I'll just, connect and disconnect power. When you do that, you actually get some feedback RF noise and makes your picture look like crap, and I don't recommend it at all. So this does streamline it quite a bit on here. Now, and that's something really important to note too, is the fact that that's the whole kind of design philosophy you took with the Pro. It seems is more elegant, more simple, more clean and polished.
Yep. It was really, my attempt to force myself to put out as much as humanly possible for me, a professional product. It's not to say that 2X Classic isn't a great product, but it's, between the spectrum of, on one end, you've got, a hobbyist DIY kit. On the other end, you've got a consumer product. The Pro is more towards that end.
So I'm going to pop a question up here from Jorge, because he's got a good one here. With 1080p LCD displays fading away, are we going to see higher line 5X, 6X, 7? What do you recommend for 4K TVs, and what is the future regarding this matter? It's a good question.
That is a good question. So on my end, I think the current products work really well with 4K TVs, and I know you're not going to like to hear this, but 4K TVs is the one place where scanlines actually do look good if you're into that sort of thing. But if you're into the higher,
No!
if you're into the higher line multiplication, I am very excited about the OSSC Pro, and I will be buying that on day one.
Very cool. So let's talk about, like you mentioned, scanlines just now. Was that something that you saw requests for, and that's why you put it in there? Was it something that you wanted to see done, and you're like, "Damn it, I'm just going to do it," or what was the reason behind adding scanlines?
So I started out like you. I didn't like scanlines. I was like, what is this crap? Why would you want to blank out every other line on your display? It sounds so silly. And now I'm getting a bit off topic, but for what it's worth, right? If you remember back in the old days, in the early 90s, when we were playing on these consumer CRTs, there were no scanlines. Those TVs are crap. They didn't have resolution to actually show the gaps. But I do understand why a lot of people would like them, and that was one of the biggest requests we got. So I figured out a way to do it, and after I started playing with it, sorry, but I actually kind of like it now.
This interview is over. No. Now, I want to talk about one other feature that you added to, and that's the comb filter. For those who don't know what it does, why it's important, how it works, kind of fill in the gaps here and get rid of the scan lines.
So first of all, I'll start by saying we all owe a huge thanks to a fellow called James F. He's somewhat active in the Shmups forum, and I think he's done some great work for the Mister. He was a genius that kind of figured out all these color decoder settings and how to make the comb filter and all the other things really look like an old-fashioned CRT, especially for composite sources like your old school NES. So I'd like to take this opportunity to just thank him. Now, the comb filter is needed because and this is only for composite video, because in composite video, you take the black and white portion of the video image as well as the color image and you mix it together. And what the comb filter does at a very basic level is exactly what it sounds. It combs out the color and the black and white portions. And what the Pro has is a fully adjustable comb filter between retro mode, which actually turns the comb filter off, completely off. It uses another form of filter called a notch filter. But to me, that's more true to how an old-fashioned CRT would work. It does have an auto mode, which turns on the full comb filtering. So that's good for more modern consoles, like if you're actually using composite with your PS2, or if you're watching a Laserdisc, that's great. And to be clear, the Classic actually has a lot of the same functionality implemented. It's just that in the Pro, it's super easy to switch on and off.
Now, and that is one thing I was going to ask you next to, as both between scanlines and comb filter, they're user adjustable, which is really, really nice.
Don't worry, I'll send you a special one where the scanline button is just taken off.
Dang, I know how to solder, so I could fix that myself. And this is just if he ever sees it for Voltart. Yes, I said solder, not solder. Now, and you did bring up a good point there that I didn't have for those watching right now. I actually have an outline here because I'm not this smart to be able to come up with all these questions on the fly. You mentioned laser discs, so if people have old school VCRs or anything that doesn't have, if they have component or composite output, it's not just for video games. You can actually use this. One of the things I thought of was for people who want to take their old, and if John Riggs is still here, old wrestling VHS tapes and convert them to digital. Granted, I'm not, promoting piracy here. I'm talking about content you already have, but even old home movies and things like that, to be able to convert to digital, you can actually use the RetroTink with the VCR and a capture card to do that, can't you?
Yes, you can. And it's actually interesting. It's an interesting question because there's a lot of nuances to this, and it's a question I get a lot. So I like to take the time to explain how these various things work. So for VCR, the best device would actually be, well, for video capture in general, if you're just trying to capture movies, the best device really is a DVD recorder with a composite input and a HDMI output. The reason is because those DVD-Rs have, if you buy a good one, has a 3D comb filter, which works much better than the 2D one and the 2X. And it has the ability to buffer multiple frames. So if your VCR signal is really bad and drops out, it at least it tries to not drop the video signal and recover that. So if your only goal is to capture video, those DVD recorder boxes, buy a used one. That's really the best choice. Of course, they're terrible for video games because all the reasons they're great for video capture are exactly the reasons why they're terrible for gaming. You can definitely use the RetroTink 2X for a Laserdisc capture. It has what's called a 2D comb filter, which isn't as good as the 3D ones and the DVD-Rs, but I think for a lot of cases it works fine. VCRs work pretty well if you have a well-behaved, good quality tape, but if your tape is kind of degraded, because it's a line doubler and does it with zero lag and no frame buffering, if there is a severe loss of sync of the VCR, you will get dropouts in your output video stream, which you may or may not care about. For some instances, right, you could probably stitch it back together. If you're trying to capture something else that's like a continuous movie, maybe not so much.
But at least that way I can get a digital version of Greedo not shooting first, not shooting second, but Han being the only one that shoots. So that's
Absolutely
important to note. I saw someone in the chat mention that they were a Star Wars, not a Star Trek fan, so they were missing out on some of the Star Trek references, but there's a good Star Wars one for you there. And you kind of mentioned it too, right there with the lag and the latency and whatnot. And that was one of the biggest benefits of the Classic was the virtually lagless design of the system. I got to figure the Pro is got to be virtually the same, isn't it?
Yeah, the basic video chain, right, from input to digitization to output is exactly the same between the Pro and the Classic. So they're both, essentially, for all intents and purposes, zero lag.
Now, I'm sure that you're already working on your next big thing. Is there a potential for a RetroTink that does feature that higher line multiplication? Go to head to head with something like the Framemeister and the OSSC, or are you kind of happy to be at the lower end is the wrong way to put it because it's still a high-end device, but in terms of cost versus those two devices you're not going to get into either one of those for under $250.
Yeah, so that is a good question. I think again, I think the Framemeister is it's a great product, but I think from an end consumer perspective, it's a dead end because obviously the production is no longer in production, and supplies are going to go down, and prices are going to go up for whatever's left over. I think the OSSC Pro again I'm super excited about it. That's going to be a day one purchase for me. I am looking into ways to get higher resolution, maybe 1080p, but that's a project that is theoretical and wouldn't come to the light of day, at least for another 2 years, to be honest.
Now, before I go back to the split screen, I just want to look over your left shoulder. I see your NES toaster sitting back there. I see a Super NES back there next to your TV and whatnot. So you've got the goods. You're not just talking the talk. You've got the systems. There you go. And you've got a Dreamcast back there too. What else are we playing? It looks like an N64 down below.
What else do I have?
PlayStation 1.
Yeah, I got a PS1, an N64, a Sega Genesis. There's a GameCube hidden back there. On the other side, I've got that SNES Mini which I modded, and I got a Mister.
I need to get my hands on one of those. I have not picked. Ooh,
that's actually honestly what I spend most of my time on is that Mister. Do you see it?
Yep. And you've
connected
to
my my big FV310. Now, I actually can't play on the CRT anymore, and I'll tell you why. It drives me crazy. The more I get into this, the more the imperfections in the CRT just drive me insane to the point where I can't focus on the game. I'm just looking at like convergence and geometry, and it's not good. It's not healthy.
So, as someone who is working in a way to make the original systems look as good as possible, so that way you don't have compatibility issues, that you don't have color sync and audio issues or whatnot. What do you think of clone systems for someone to get into, say that they haven't been into retro gaming in 15, 20 years? What are your thoughts on clones?
I might get some flack for this, but to be honest, I think some of the clones are terrible. The classic CLAS. Played with that one.
You buffered there pretty bad. Say that again.
Yeah, I might get some flack for this, but I actually think some of the clones are not terrible. The one I played with recently, the classic CLASIQ, that does both the Nintendo,
The
the
old
SNES,
school.
NES, and the Genesis, I think, the old school. Yeah,
Yep.
that one actually has an HDMI output that I think is zero lag, and it does 720p. It handles all the 240p effects properly. It's noisy and the image is not great and washed out, but if you're looking to pop it in and you aren't super concerned about accuracy and you have a collection of cards, it's not a bad way to get started. The problem with all this stuff is, right, once you get in and you start going down the rabbit hole, it's like, all right, this is great. Now I need my next fix. So I'm going to get the original system and I'm going to get it modded, and then it goes on and on and on. But as a gateway drug, it's not a bad place to start.
Well, and I know a lot of people will frown on this, but this was my original re-entry back in, and I know people hate on the Retron 5, but where I started with this, I now have over 100 different consoles between original hardware, HDMI modded stuff, my RetroTink, my OSSC, HD Retrovision cables. I mean, yeah, you called it when you called it a rabbit hole. Um, Now, speaking of which, too, so for those who have original equipment, there's another device that has come out recently where you're actually collaborating with the folks, and this is called the Rad 2X. For those who aren't as familiar with the Rad 2X, what is it, and where does it kind of fit in with the whole RetroTink family?
The Rad 2X is something I helped design. It is a product that Retro Gaming Cables in the UK produces, and essentially, in a nutshell, it's basically the RetroTink Classic shrunk down into a dongle, into a plug-and-play dongle. So I think it fits nicely into the position where if you have one console or one or two consoles and you want the simplest, cleanest solution, right? You don't want to have extra dongles and wires. Maybe you want something that you can grab and take to a friend's house. I think that is the best way to get that done, and you get all the benefits of the RetroTink Classic in terms of image handling.
So
Definitely a lot better than that.
those HD cables.
Yes, definitely a lot better than those HD cables.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong here, would your best advice then be like if someone just has, say, a Super NES and a Genesis, and that's it, and that's all they're going to play, go with the Rad 2X. But once you get beyond that, probably going with a RetroTink and an AV switch box or something like that, probably going to be cheaper in the long run.
That's generally true. And I think that's a nice thing about having so many options is because everyone's setup is so different. So, say take a moment to see, how many devices you need, how you like your setup, and it's always good to have choices that kind of meet everyone's needs.
Now, we all know that, what is the saying? Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, but there's certain imitation that, yeah, just kind of gets you frustrated and angry. And at times, you just kind of have to shake your head and laugh. And there have been some really shady people out there cloning and copying your work. Even done, this is the one that I loved. They copied some typos that you had on the website, which
That was
was
great.
hilarious. How can someone be assured that they're getting a genuine product, that it's not a knockoff, that it's coming out the front door, not the back door, if you know what I mean there?
It's pretty easy. Just buy it from us or from an official reseller. And I will say that I am very grateful that the community kind of had my back on this. And I think that's the one thing that I really love about this community, which is very different from most businesses I've been in and most industries I've been in, is you don't have this kind of, close knit camaraderie, right? And that's one of the things that really makes me happy and grateful and so excited to be in retro gaming is because of that feeling. Yeah, but otherwise, yeah, I, I look on the bright side. I take it as kind of a badge of honor that it's something that was worth copying. So whatever, it is what it is. I don't want to get too deep into it, but it is kind of a funny story in the sense that it was an interesting lesson to pick very carefully who your vendors were. And I think the clones came out because my original PCB vendor, who I had 10 years of business with, they were the guys that built all my test fixtures in grad school. They were the guys that actually built our first products at my company, not gaming, but my other company. They built, they built the circuit boards for our products, and it was a 10-year relationship. And I guess one day they decided to go out of business, and someone there took the entire designs, the bombs, the Gerbers, the hex files, and then it got cut loose. So I don't know. I don't know what to say.
Well, and I will tell you, well, it didn't directly affect me. The company I used to work for, we made radio control receivers, transmitters, so on and so forth. And when I say you have some stuff going out the front door and others going out the back, there was a vendor that we had that were taking our exact, down to the cases and the labels and everything, and they were selling them not secondhand, but basically gray market style on the internet at basically 10% over cost. So they're still making money, undercutting us, and it's just it's the fun of having to deal with overseas suppliers sometime.
Yeah.
So
but
you've got a lot going on, my friend. What's next? I mean, like we kind of hinted talking about other upscalers and whatnot, but you've got more things as far as excuse me, not the coronavirus, by the way. As far as other splitters, adapters, you seem to be getting more into SCART. What do you got coming down the pipeline?
First of all, I hate SCART, and I know I'm gonna get flack for this, and you can hate on me for it, but I despise SCART, and I'll tell you why. There's two main reasons why I hate SCART. First of all, you can really readily source anymore. I'm not a fan of the products where the BOM that my PCB vendor has instructions, send the buyer to go look on AliExpress. That's not a great feeling. And the other reason I hate SCART is because it's not what I would call fully standardized, right? You've got all these weird sync formats. You need 75 ohm sync, you need TTL sync, and it just seems to be never convenient. I'm a big fan of going component video just because it's actually they're actually real standards for that people that are relatively simple to follow, and it's using parts that are still generally supported, and you can still find mainline consumer equipment that still works with component video. So that's kind of my spiel there. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, I think SCART, obviously a lot of people have SCART setups, and the image quality is great. So I've been working on some basically free projects for converting SCART to VGA, SCART to NTSC, S-Video and Component, S-Video and Composite, kind of to fill the gap that the old Raspberry Pi hats left, which Castlemania is now selling. So if you guys are interested in the Pi stuff, you can still get them. But that kind of fills the gap there. For example, if you want to take your Mister, right, and connect it to an S-Video composite TV, those are kind of the pro bono projects I've been working on, and hopefully someone picks it up and builds them. Because unfortunately, I'm a little bit pressed for time to mess with those two directly. But otherwise, I'm not too ready to exactly say what we're working on next, but I will say it's been a pretty productive stay at home.
Well, that's awesome, and I do want to invite folks that are here in the chat. First of all, Mr. Pete 1985, thank you for the $5 super chat. Never expected, but always appreciated. If you have any questions for Mike, we are starting to wrap things up here. Please make sure to leave them in the chat. Sorry, I had a little bit of a burp there. Sorry. But I do have some questions that we reached out on Twitter and on our community tab on YouTube, and I wanted to relay some questions and kind of give you a chance to answer them. And this first one comes from Evan4. So nice, you had to name him twice. He says he has both a PS2 component cable from HD Retrovision, good choice, and component cables with a PS1 adapter from HD Retrovision. His question is, what would be the best way to play PS1 and PS2 games through the RetroTink? There's a lot of misinformation out there about PS2 backwards compatibility using PS2 component cables and TVs accepting 240p signals through the component ports. How could I use the Tink and those two consoles to get a nice display on my TV? Is one way cleaner than the other? Are they all pretty close? Thank you so much in advance.
I would say that, in general, if you don't have a modded PS1, right, for example, the PSIO, right? If you don't have a modded PS1, then just use a PS2 with the HD Retrovision component cables. That's pretty much going to cover virtually every PS1 game you have. Backwards compatibility on the PS2 is excellent. I think there might be a few edge cases where it isn't, but yeah, PS2 with the component cables, I think you're all set. You could do PS1 as well, but I think my sense is that the difference would be very little, but why not use the PS2? Because, you can play both systems at once.
All right, and we have this one here from the chat. Dion asks, are there any plans for a version of the RetroTink that can accept sources of 480p and up, particularly for the 7th and maybe an 8th generation system?
That is something that we've gotten a request for since day one, and unfortunately, that was a fundamental limitation of the video decoder chip that made everything possible with the original RetroTink. So it has been a request that we've gotten, but we don't have a fully fleshed out solution yet. And the reason is because that video decoder chip, which we use in the RetroTink 2X, which unfortunately doesn't support 480p, so we couldn't firmware patch that, has a really high tolerance to standard definition and 240 480i and 240p sources, and producing a nicely well-behaved output that you can connect to a modern TV. So we don't have a fully fleshed solution for that yet, but it is a request that we get all the time, and not something, and we generally don't like to ignore requests.
All right, good deal. So, Deanne, thank you for asking that. This next one comes from Brad Dahl, and he wants to know, and I'm not familiar with this issue, and I don't know if you are or not. He wants to know, on the original RetroTink, is the audio fix on the way through an update to the original model? I haven't looked into it again super recently. I'm not sure what that might be in relation to.
Okay, so that is a very good question, and the very first RetroTinks in 2018, the audio, it was mostly on N64 consoles, which had a really high audio amplitude. It caused the audio to clip. So if you have a loud explosion or something, you hear like, and My Life in Gaming did a great job giving an illustration of that. That's a pretty simple fix. It sounds a little bit silly, but you could get for $6 on Amazon a RCA volume control. So you just put that in line with the red and yellow audio lines, and you can just turn down the volume and you're all set.
Is it essentially just an inline attenuator?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Hey, my years at Radio Shack paid off. What can I say?
Radio Shack was a great place. I miss that place.
You know what? When it was good, I loved working there. But man, I can't say I don't miss it, because there are days I honestly do miss it. It was fun. So Brandon's channel asked, any plans, and it's kind of long, so bear with me here. Any plans for RetroTink 3X to better compete with the OSSC? What are plans for future plans for the RetroTink series? Any plans to add RF to support old consoles? He asked like Atari. I will add in there like the Famicom. Any plans to add pass-through support for 480p? I think that we kind of addressed that. His one real criticism of the device is consumer design. Doesn't look like it fits in with the rest of his electronics. Seems Mike has a typical engineer mind to build the device as efficient as possible. You've kind of admitted that. While not focusing as much on design. For example, TV, VCR have a design elements that have command functions. Consider Roku. I'm going to kind of, because I think we've kind of addressed that before, that, yeah, you were looking at functionality versus making it pretty. Anyway, the question is Mike thinking about how to design future versions to better integrate aesthetically with most other consumer electronics? So to wrap this up simply here, RetroTink 3X or more, RF capable and improved aesthetics, which I think you've kind of talked about a little bit here.
No real plans for the 3X at the moment, because again, like I said, that's basically recreating an OSSC, which there's no reason to do so. Mark's is quite a bit more talented than I am. In terms of aesthetics, it is what it is. I'm an engineer, so I don't have anything to say beyond that. RF has been a big request. It's the challenge with RF is that you can't really buy those demodulators, and you can salvage it from a VCR, but obviously that's not sustainable for building a product that expect to make a lot of. The best solution for RF is just use an old VCR. The tape head doesn't have to work, but the tuner section should basically last forever. And again, it's just because these analog RF tuners, they're not really parts that you can buy in any reasonable fashion. And even if you bought it, it would be a metal box that's this big, bigger than the device itself.
Right, and I got to figure something like that. I mean, it would be cost prohibitive to try to do it with like an FPGA or something like that to take that output. I know I've seen some people, and I don't think that it should work. I mean, I scratch my head when I see people do this, but I guess it works. Can you really just take and put an RCA to coax adapter on the end of an output on an Atari 2600 and go into coax and have it work. That doesn't seem like it should work.
You mean take the RF from the out of the Atari into composite video?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so. That doesn't sound right. I think you got to run it through a tuner like a VCR.
That's what I figured too.
I'm sure you could composite video mod it though.
I don't know that I've ever seen anyone do any a whole lot of mods. I mean, I've seen Ben Heck do like his handheld ones and stuff like that, but I don't know that I've really seen any other mods for it. But then again, you can get the Retron 77 for under $70, a lot of sevens there, and it'll do good enough for Atari 2600. Oh, and John Riggs is in chat, and he actually says that's what he does. So it is a thing that you can make work. I just never would have thought that would have been the right type of signal. But if you think of an Atari 2600, you have the cable with the RCA jack on the end that goes into essentially an RF modulator to go to the VHF. So I guess it would work in theory. Yeah. John says it works, but super staticky if you go direct. I mean, it's Atari 2600, so that could just be programmed into the system. Yeah. And last call for questions. We have Jim Bott here that said, how about a switch built into a RetroTink 2X so he can have component S-video and composite cables all connected at the same time? And before you get to it, one thing that I will point out, Jim, in this is if you do that, you still have to split the audio input somehow. So that would be another issue you'd have to address. But how about a switch configuration to a future RetroTink?
I think audio is the biggest thing because for each type of input, now you need multiple outputs and multiple audio inputs, and it gets a little bit. You end up with a box that to me is a little bit unwieldy. The best solution, honestly, is to use a switch like this, a component video switch. Now this one is very high end, very nice, but if you only needed 2 or 3 inputs, you could use a much cheaper one as well, and you would just wire the composite for your composite sources. Just only use the green jack. S-video actually works with this too. This one you need a custom cable, but you basically need to split the S-video, the Luma channel into green and the color channel into red, and you could basically hook up all those devices to the RetroTink 2X with a component video switch.
And I gotta say, I had a chance to see that device you just had in your hands at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo last year. Castlemania Ryan had one in there too. All of his different monitors. God, that thing's sexy. That thing is just sexy. Let's see. There are Radio Shack ones on eBay still for 10 to 20 as far as switcher boxes from Keith mentions that. Yeah, I use, what is mine down here? I've got a 4-in-1 output. I don't even remember what the brand is on it anymore. But yeah, I've seen the Radio Shack ones that you mentioned. Component and composite S-video ones. Yep, I know exactly which ones you're talking about there, Keith. So, Mike, anything in closing here? Because we're coming up on an hour, and man, I didn't know that we were going to go this deep into the RetroTink, but this has been fun.
Yeah, likewise. Well, thank you very much for having me on. It's been a pleasure, and thank you, and thank all of your viewers for taking the time to listen to my nonsense.
Well, it's not nonsense. It's a lot of good technical information, and the nice thing about it, and I will say, I love the way that this kind of came together, is the fact that, first of all, you were patient with me. We've been trying to get this interview going for like 2 months now, and I've been trying to get this set up and everything going. So thank you all. Oh, Jorge does have, actually, there's a question here from Jorge. Have you seen the Sidon light gun project? Do you think there's a way to make light guns work properly on LCD TVs? That has a lot to do with patching the ROM. I'll tell you that for starters. I don't know if you've looked into that at all, Mike, or not.
That unfortunately, I haven't looked too much into that, but I think light guns is going to be a tough nut because if not all of them, where the electron beam in the CRT scans and activates the sensor on the gun. So there's various workarounds of various complexities, but there's no straightforward solution, unfortunately. You might actually just need a CRT for that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even the one company who's tried to make a commercial grade version of that Hyperkin, and I've got the video up here on the channel. It doesn't really work well with the top loader. It doesn't work with the front loader. It doesn't work with their 2- and 3-in-1 systems. It works with the Retron and HD, and that is about it. So I think that is the unicorn we will be chasing for the foreseeable future. So, Mike, if they're looking to follow you online to get more information about RetroTink products, where can they follow you online?
Twitter, RetroTink 2.
Facebook, YouTube, any other channels, or you just a Twitter user?
Yeah, the only thing I use is Twitter. Yeah, not so much on anything else.
Okay, and of course, it's retrotink.com, I think?
Yep.
All right, Mike, I want to thank you very much for joining us here today, spending some time and answering everybody's questions here. For those, if you came in partway through, we will have this up in the archives here shortly. And again, I do want to remind everybody that this broadcast has been brought to you by the fine folks over at CastleManiaGames.com, your home for accessories, consoles, games, and modern and retro video game accessories for the enthusiast. CastleManiaGames.com carries the top names in the business. They carry RetroTink, HD Retrovision cables, perfect to go into your RetroTink, Retrobit, Retrofighters, Hyperkin, and more. Plus, when you shop at CastleManiaGames.com, you earn Castle Cash, their reward program that lets you earn money towards future purchases. And don't forget, if you use promo code ROCKSOLID10, you can save 10% off of most items on the website. And rest assured, they are open for business and shipping daily as normal to serve you and your family. Mike, again, from my family to yours, from the Rock Solid family to yours, the best to you and everybody over at RetroTink, not only today with what we're going through with COVID-19, but into the future as well. Thank you so much for spending some time with us, my friend.
You as well. You're very welcome, and that goes both ways. You take care, you and your family, as well as all your everyone that's out there. Thank you so much.
Perfect. And until next time, guys, we are checked out, gone.